All right, we are recording now. So it's going there. All right. Let's see. Can everybody see the cover, kind of the cover page of this tonight? It's good. Okay. All right. So I don't know how many folks here have heard about ideational power. It's something I only learned about a few years ago, and once you see examples of it around you, you'll realize the folks that are generally being the most successful in a political context are the ones that have achieved ideational power. And so it's a bit of a provocative title, but the NRA has done it as well as anybody. And I wanted to take time and learn about it and share that knowledge and see what can we learn? What can Democrats learn from the NRA to make us better at at what we're trying to achieve? The much of this comes from a work from 2021 by Matthew Lacombe. He's an associate professor of American politics at Case Western University out in Ohio. It is really well researched, and despite the fact it's an academic book, it doesn't really read like an academic book. It's actually a pretty quick read. I don't think it's dry at all, and I got a ton of knowledge out of it. I enjoyed the book, and I've taught it now the last few years in a grad school course, and my students tell me they really have enjoyed the book as well. So I would recommend this, and perhaps after you hear this tonight, your appetite may be whetted enough that you may want to order it yourself. I want to take not very long, but a couple of minutes and just go over a very brief history of the NRA. I think most folks are very familiar with what it has been in contemporary times, and really, especially since about the mid to late 1970s. But it was not always what it has become over the last 50 years. So, one of the NRA's core strengths has been that it's been able to adapt its purpose and place and to some extent its brand and its fit in the country over about 150 years. It was founded in the 1870s, early 1870s, as a state organization on Long Island in New York, as an organization to build skills in rifle shooting and marksmanship. Nobody thought of it as a political organization, much less partisan. And this was soon after the Civil War, and the anticipation was that there would probably be more entanglements in the future, domestic and or foreign. And so they wanted to keep skills sharp for war. It was originally largely funded by the state legislature of the state of New York, but within about 25 years, for a variety of reasons, state funding diminished quickly and almost entirely. And the organization, which had depended on that money, and so it had not done much in the way of membership or fundraising, nearly died off in the late 1890s. But then at the tail end of the 1890s, the Spanish American War saved the NRA. Although America largely got what it wanted out of the war, it was stunned by how poor the marksmanship, the general use of accuracy of the soldiers were with their firearms. And so the federal government decided to do a national long-term contract with the NRA to do training programs and to get ready for what, again, they anticipated would be future wars. The big benefit to joining the NRA, and this is really where they got traction, is the feds authorized the NRA to for any member who signed up to get exclusive surplus military firearms at discounted prices. This ended up being very popular, and a lot of hunters, a lot of sportsmen found this to be a real hook to join the NRA, and so they got thousands of members pretty quickly at the turn of the 20th century. So a couple of key moments in the timeline of the NRA. Between the beginning of the 20th century, when this contract occurred, to the early days of the Great Depression, the NRA began pardon me, began to become not so much partisan, but politically engaged. They began lobbying Congress in the 1930s to water down firearms legislation, including registration of firearms, the banning of certain kinds of firearms. There were two under FDR in 34 and 38. They began with great momentum as a response to increased street crime, particularly early in the Great Depression, and the rise of organized crime, the mafia and other similar groups. But by the late 1930s, the NRA had begun perfecting a letter writing campaign strategy, which at the time was novel and uniquely effective. It scared Congress enough, both the House and the Senate, that NRA leadership not only were they able to water down or kill a number of bills, they got to the point by the late 30s where they were getting invited into meetings to craft legislation. Obviously, that's power. You don't have to try to kill legislation. You're actually crafting the legislation before it even gets to the public. And this was so that the elected officials could avoid becoming the target of their now famous letter writing campaigns. This continued, obviously, through World War II and into the 50s. And by the early 1960s, they've gone in 25 years from about 10,000 NRA paying members to over 1 million in about a 35-year period. By the early 60s, the NRA was still not seen as partisan, though they were clearly political and engaged by then. And a lot of that is because into the 1960s, gun ownership rates had little correlation to party affiliation. Nobody really thought of gun ownership as a Republican or a Democratic thing. By the early 60s, the NRA language had begun to change, however, and Lacombe, the author of the book, spends a lot of time going through that. We won't tonight, going through the textual studies of the magazines and the newsletters that were being sent by the NRA to its members, and he noticed changes in language. So starting in the early 60s, the NRA's language changes from an Americanism, that is, that we should all be trained and armed to defend against foreign threats, to defense of the Second Amendment. It's not that they didn't believe in the Second Amendment before, it's just not something that was a big part of their rhetoric. As we get to the end of the mid to late 60s, post JFK assassination, President Johnson, a few months after the assassination, this is early 1964, tried some gun control related legislation. As you might imagine, 3 months after JFK, they were initially very popular, about 8-1 in support in congressional mail counts. However, the NRA, one of the first times they got really active in this even wider scale way, they began a feverish letter writing campaign. Senator Dodd, not Chris Dodd, who would be the senator much more recently, but his dad, Thomas Dodd, his office got 20,000 letters in the 2 weeks before the big vote on this particular gun bill. That's not a typo, not 2%, not 2,000, two. Two of the 20,000 letters his office received in the final 2 weeks were in favor of the bill, which did not pass. This change in language from Americanism to the Second Amendment allowed the NRA to begin to get into other kinds of legislation and other kinds of rhetoric. So now you could talk about law and order, and crime in the 1960s emerged as a top issue as we got late in the decade. Government outreach became a connective tissue to the Second Amendment argument. Too much government. This all connected with the unexpected nomination in 1964 of Barry Goldwater for the presidency. And it accelerated an internal NRA debate. As Goldwater was clearly more in the camp of the Second Amendment, of more guns, pro-guns, than Johnson, who had tried that legislation earlier in 64, it became clear that this was getting partisan. And if they did that, they would lose the federal funding that they had had throughout the century that I mentioned a moment ago. So they had to make a decision. Do we get more partisan in our political activity and lose the funding, or do we hold back and try to preserve the funding? Well, by then, some of you who follow the history of this stuff may have heard of the New Right, which began in earnest at the very little bit of the late 50s and really accelerated after Goldwater's failed run for the presidency. They were beginning to infiltrate the membership and even the leadership of the NRA, and the New Right became the impetus for everything from the Federalist Society to the John Birch Society, eventually the Reagan's nomination and his presidency. The new right had quietly been spending years, starting in the 60s into the 70s, building new media outlets, think tanks, recruiting, training candidates. They had become real uh, groundbreakers on how to raise money through direct mail campaigns in a way that had not been done in politics before. They were becoming the power center of the right in America and taking it ideologically to the right and starting to take over the NRA. They found that gun owners were particularly engaged activists compared to other types of policies and issues, in large part because the NRA had spent decades cultivating and slowly growing its politicization of its growing membership base. And obviously, 1 million people by the late 1960s is a tremendous number of people, particularly at that moment in history. By 1977, the National NRA Convention, which was held in Cincinnati that year, it was a very famous event, and the new right members decided they were going to try to take over the NRA. They largely did, and they called it the Revolt at Cincinnati. And it fundamentally changed the direction of the NRA from the old school leadership who were trying to hold on to the federal money and avoid overt partisanship to the new right that relished it and obviously took us to the current day. The old school acquiesced. They did polling after it. A 1978 NRA survey showed that the membership registration, party registration of the membership in 1978 was Republican, but not overwhelmingly. You can see 40% Republican, 29% Democrat, and the rest were some form of independent or unregistered. But then when they said, "What is your ideology?" by 1978, it had become overwhelmingly a conservative group rather than liberal. And that's something that 20 years earlier you would not have expected to see. So this was at a time when Democrats still had a conservative wing, whether it was Scoop Jackson, yet in terms of foreign policy, whether it was even somebody like Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was a pro-life Democrat, although a social liberal in many other ways. It was a very different time. And what happened very quickly in the late 70s was the sorting of ideology matched with parties. And so by the time you get to Reagan in 80, gun ownership became closely affiliated with the Republican Party, and the ideological sorting of voters was largely complete. So if you were a conservative, you were going to be a Republican. If you were a gun owner, very quickly, it was becoming more and more clear you were likely going to become a Republican. So if you were a gun owner, you were a conservative. And if you were a conservative, well, you were a Republican. And that takes us very quickly to the present day. And much of the last 45 plus years have been living in that rubric of politics. With Trump, we're actually seeing some changes in that, but not as it relates to gun policy, at least not yet. So what is the NRA's secret sauce? In 2017, following a series of high-profile mass casualty shootings, a Pew poll showed what a lot of polls showed. 84% favored mandatory background checks, more than 7 out of 10 favored a federal database to track sales, almost 7 out of 10 favored a ban on assault weapons. We see here even at the state level in New Hampshire, one of the most pro-gun, highest percentage of gun ownership states in the country, we see numbers kind of like this. We see for 48-hour wait periods and other such policy, wide support even among gun owners. So the positions of the NRA do not match what the polls have been saying for decades. And here's the thing, the NRA has never been a significant donor to candidates. You will not see them all over finance reports. They have not been a front man consistently for the firearms manufacturers. Sometimes they have been supportive. Other times they encouraged a 2000 boycott of Smith & Wesson, for example, because they didn't like some of the policies that Smith & Wesson were talking about doing, voluntarily putting certain safety measures into the guns that they manufactured. The boycott almost bankrupted Smith & Wesson back in 2000. So they have at times been quite confrontational with firearms manufacturers. And they've never heavily advertised on TV. direct mail, or digitally for or against candidates explicitly. Compared to many other organizations on the left or right, they spend far less money, and the positions that they fight for are often not majority positions in terms of popular vote. So here's the NRA secret sauce, and it's what we're going to look at tonight, and then we'll get into some discussion about it. Ideational power is the blend of identity and ideology. So in identity, and we'll go through these in a moment, it's about cultivation. How do you cultivate identity? The politicization of your organization. It has to become political in order to take advantage of the identity that you're cultivating. Dissemination. How do you communicate regularly, effectively, in ways that build identity, that actually double down on the relationship building within your organization? And the final is mobilization. How do they get people to do stuff? Many of you you're all involved in your own ways in politics, and it can be very difficult to get people to take the next step and politically engage, the activism part. That's identity. We'll go through those. Ideology. This, I think, is today's most fascinating contrast between the GOP and the Democratic Party in my lifetime. Ideology. Allow political bundling. Republicans, going back to the 70s, generally appreciate that the wider they frame the choice in American politics, the bigger the tent they can build. They can fit more people under it. And we'll look at how they're doing that in a way that the Democratic Party isn't doing so well these days. The second is a really important concept that I really want to impress upon folks tonight. It's called party group alignment. It is the idea that people usually have one issue, or organizations have one issue that is their big issue, and other issues that they care about, but just not as much. And the question is, how do you take people that have different number one issues and get them under the same party, the same group, the same tent, and be able to de-emphasize disagreements down their priority list enough that they can still work together, even if they disagree on their non-number one issue? And then number three is own your issue and connect it to one party. For most of our lives, we've been told that the power of bipartisanship, it can make an issue, a position attractive by having that branding. The NRA has made a decision, and they have a powerful argument that sometimes the value of bipartisanship could be overrated if it's coming at the expense of getting high intensity of one party to prioritize your issue and defend that issue. And then the third and final is this ideational power. When you do the first and the second thing really well, it's the combining of cause-based identity with wide, simple ideological bundles of issues. When you're doing this right, you're not spending a lot of time persuading people. You're spending actually most of your time and money and attention cultivating your base, motivating your base. That's when you have the ideational power. And then it allows you to play at all three levels of power, and we'll go through that. And I think you'll find the three levels of ideational power pretty interesting, and then you'll see how that is used here in New Hampshire. So let's start with identity. The GOP has turned identity politics into a slur, basically, right? You've all seen it. It puts Democrats and progressive causes on the defense. But all successful politics are about building identity. We're all doing identity politics. That's how you activate large groups of people efficiently. If you didn't have a situation where people were able to connect with each other because they identified together, even if they didn't know each other personally, you would never be able to get movements done. You'd never be able to mobilize voters. We're all doing identity politics. It's just that the GOP has turned that some forms of identity politics into a negative, into almost a slur. So how do you build identity? The NRA. The NRA has figured this out over about 80 years. Number one, membership in your organization, let's say the Democratic Party, it must have perceived value. People have to believe that being a member of your organization, your party, inherently brings value, particularly if you're asking them to spend money. So the NRA has a very low threshold for a membership fee. I believe it's about $30. And they do that to attach value, but people clearly are willing to pay it. They perceive tremendous value. And the members in your organization must share a specific characteristic. It can't be too broad. It has to be something specific enough that it creates a distinct emotional bind to the group. And the NRA, obviously, a big part of it is gun ownership by definition, but that there are values that they have cultivated around that, like self-sufficiency, the ability to protect oneself. They've wrapped a flag around it. And then finally, you want to have being in the group, projecting positive traits, and being outside the group, projecting negative traits. So imagine that there's a group of folks who like to hunt, and they go out and they hunt regularly, and they all drive to a location. And let's say there are four guys, and three of the guys have an NRA bumper sticker on their car, but one of them does not. That actually projects a negative set of traits to the other three guys. They're proud of it. They want you to know they're in the NRA. And look, you've all driven the highways of New Hampshire and the back roads. You know that for a lot of gun owners, it's not enough to own a gun, use a gun to hunt, game, protect. It's culture. They want you to know that they own a gun. So being in the group is cool and has positive traits. And that's something we want to think about how we cultivate identity. The second thing is you got to be able to politicize identity. So, for example, I'm a big sports fan. I'm a big Red Sox fan. Generally speaking, being a Red Sox fan is an identity, but it does not carry a lot of political power to it because people don't think of it as a politicized thing. Now, NFL football is beginning to take on a bit of a political, there's data about that. And so there may be a little bit of, if you want to communicate an alpha male, a bro kind of thing, identifying your sports fandom may actually have some political residency. But, generally that's not the case. And so whatever identity we're talking about, you have to be able to connect it to politics or it doesn't give you the shot to build this power, ideational power. For the NRA, they've cultivated identity as recreation and self-defense back in the day, but those aren't political. When politics matters, they use the language in terms of how legislation would impact your identity, your values. They are able to take non-political values and identity and connect it over decades with political language that makes people feel like their own identity is on the line, is being attacked. The third part of identity is the ability to disseminate. So unique platforms for members which emphasize particular identity characteristics. So for example, there's a monthly magazine for the NRA that members get. If you're in the club, if you are literally a member and you get the publication, there are unique language, editorial content, calls to action, education opportunities that if you don't get the magazine, you're unlikely to get it. It's a unique platform. We're seeing much more of this now with unique YouTube channels, podcasts. Bless you. The second element of dissemination is regular and purposeful outreach. If any of you have seen me at events, I've said many times, I've never lost a volunteer by overworking them. You lose volunteers and supporters by underworking people or by malworking them. There has to be a rhythm, regular outreach, regular connection to be a part. Your organization needs to be a part of people's lives and part of the structure of their life, the regularity of it. And it has to be purposeful. If there's a call to action, there has to be a feeling that that call to action has a reason, it has meaning, it can be measured. This is how you get people to come back the next time and anticipate that outreach and especially the call to action. The NRA in particular, and I've seen this in the literature, Matthew Lacombe writes about this at length. More than most organizations, the NRA has put high value on activities and programs that encourage physical gatherings. I have seen this in my own political life. I know we're doing Zoom tonight, but I think there's so much more value in engaging in a program or a conversation when everybody's in person in a room. You get so much more connection. There's more dissemination. You can always record it and share it, and that's valuable. but there's nothing like building a relationship in person between people. And the NRA has explicitly prioritized this, and I think much to their benefit. It's very important. The last thing about building identity that the NRA has done well is what they call political mobilization. This goes back to the ask I was talking about a moment ago. Make the ask for your members simple. Email this letter to your congressperson by clicking here. If you ask a volunteer or a member to do very many steps, even if it's multiple simple steps, the participation rates drop through the floor very quickly. And so the NRA over the years have become the gold standard, pardon me, of keeping the asks simple. The second thing they do is ask that they make the asks tangible. Can members easily see how the action they're being asked to do is connected to a desired outcome? So they will say, we are trying to kill this bill. Here are the 20 members of Congress who are on the fence. We need to get as many of the 20 as possible to kill the bill. You are in their district. That's a very tangible, tell me why this matters. It adds value, and then they keep it simple, and they get incredibly high engagement. And they've been doing this since the 1930s. The technology, the means have changed, the platforms have changed, but the thought process has not, and it shouldn't. It's been very effective for 90 years. And then what they do is they connect the dots of all this. They tie it back to identity, the language. Your identity is under attack. You are under attack. You believe in protecting your family, hunting. You believe in whatever it is. Those people on the Hill in DC are attacking you. And they've built identity over so long. This is an extremely motivating force. A couple of additional points about how the NRA looks at building identity. The free rider dilemma. If you have a small number of people doing the work, but a large number of people who will enjoy the benefit of that work, it becomes very easy to become a free rider, to rely on a small number of people. And if you're not careful, it gets worse and worse, and fewer people will actually do the work if they feel like I'm going to get the benefit for nothing if I don't. And yeah, Leslie, that's a very good point. I'm going to get into that in 1 second. Excellent. So the NRA avoids the free rider dilemma by creating a sense of belonging. Over many decades, they've created a sense of obligation or relationship with each other where you feel like I'm a member, and if not me, then whom? If you cultivate the relationships properly over time, there is a set. People want to go and do things if they're in person. This is who they are, and they feel like they don't want to let people that are just like them down. Polling shows popularity for policies. We looked at that earlier, but they're able to kill policies that are broadly popular because they run the issue through the screen of group identity attacks, as I mentioned earlier. So the polling tends to be very vanilla. And people will say, yeah, in a vacuum, sure, I think we should have a wait period. But then the NRA gets to work and they begin to attach the hypothetical impacts of legislation to their members who at a very high percentage engage because they have built this identity that is able to attach to the negative consequences of legislation. And this is so important. This third point is something I think about more and more in my own democratic activism. They spend very little money, relatively speaking, because they correctly believe that cultivation plus motivation is cheaper and more effective than persuasion. If you have a base of support and you are spending most of your time, money, and attention cultivating your base of support, building the relationship, getting them to take their friends who are not yet part of the group and slowly bringing them in because of the culture you're developing, it is then you're spending your money cultivating and then motivating. And it's not hard to motivate a group like that. It's cheaper, it's more effective. When you don't have that, you have to try to persuade people who are not part of the group, the party, the NRA. to get off the couch and do something that they're not already inclined to do. It's much harder, it's much more expensive, and in politics we call that persuasion as compared to motivation. Now, there was a question about, and I hopefully I'm framing this correctly, about activists being encouraged to fill out forms to send emails to legislators, say on a particular committee, and the effectiveness of that. Hopefully, I'm framing that correctly, and I certainly have seen and heard that a lot during this legislative session. I'm not going to say that doing that delivers no value. However, I would say there's not a lot of evidence this session that sending even thousands of emails to a committee, let's say a Republican-led committee, because that's what they are, to vote against or for something that they're not inclined to do already. There's not a lot of evidence, certainly this year, that that has resulted in very much change. The pressure, it comes when you have for legislators that are in very tight districts, House and Senate districts, where in 2026, they know it's going to be a nail biter, or they believe it will be. That is where the power for folks like us begins. And this is why, as we get deeper into 2025, look, we got to get back majorities. If you don't have the majority and the Republicans stay in a coalesced, we're not going to win very often. And that's what's happened this session. They've stayed coalesced. The times when, for example, a 15-week abortion ban was defeated before it could even get to committee, it was withdrawn, was not, as I've heard from the folks on the inside, it was not because the Republicans on the committee got thousands of emails saying, do not vote for the 15-week abortion ban because it's a bad policy, it'll hurt people, although that's true. It was because Kelly Ayotte shook down the primary sponsor of it, I believe a Wolfboro state rep, and said, if this thing gets any further, you will be in trouble in your 2026 election. And she would have been. Ayotte, regardless of how she feels about abortion rights in her heart, it doesn't. She has decided, as has the GOP in New Hampshire, that if they can take abortion off the table, it gives them a much cleaner path forward politically. And they're right this year. And so they've been pretty disciplined about that, even though a lot of legislators would describe themselves as pro-life and certainly would like to see something more strict than a 24-week ban. But Ayotte has been able to keep them together by putting pressure. I see, Pat, I saw your message there. If you get non-constituents emailing somebody, if you're in a Grafton-based House district and you're getting literally hundreds or thousands of emails from people that don't live in your district or even your county, it's just not going to have a lot of impact. And it looks like astroturfing to them at a certain point. It looks constructed and loses some of the fear. I know when I was a local elected official, when you would see somebody reasonable and articulate coming to the city council meeting or the school board meeting and disagreeing with what you believe, what you were going to vote for, that would perk my ears, because I would say for every one person who has their act together, who lives in the community, shows up and says, I don't usually come to a meeting because I'm busy, I got kids, I work, but this is important and I'm telling you, you're wrong on this. I always believed that there were probably 100 people in the community who would not come out at night for every one person like that. But what happens is when you get the same people showing up all the time, or when you have people not from your community or your district that are doing, we would kind of shrug. We try to be respectful, but it would not have an impact. And so this is where the NRA has been for decades so good at focusing resources in the relevant districts. If there's a swing district in Pennsylvania, they would take their NRA members in that congressional district, and those folks would go to work. And you felt it. And I've talked to members of Congress who have definitely felt it. Leslie, with a good question. What's the difference between motivation and persuasion? in a nutshell, motivation is when you have somebody who basically is on the team. The problem is you're not sure if they're going to turn out or not. So maybe it's to vote, like a low engagement Democrat would be one that we're trying to motivate a lot of times, as compared to persuasion, which is somebody who is engaged and is likely to vote, for example, in the next election. But you're trying to persuade them to come to your side. So motivation is more generally, motivation is more about taking people that are on your side and getting them to act. Persuasion tends to be more about taking somebody who is likely to act, but is not certain about in which direction they're going to act. So a swing voter, as we traditionally have known it, tended to be more of a persuasion voter, whereas a motivation, what they might call a get out the vote, has traditionally been more of somebody who is on our side but is a lower engagement. So the NRA has cultivated a base, and their job is not to persuade that base to that they are right. It is simply to motivate them. But because they've cultivated them so well, even motivation is not terribly difficult to do. It's very powerful. So that's identity. Let's talk about ideology for a minute. And I think the Democratic Party right now is struggling a lot with ideology, our values. It's not clear in all the events, in-person events I do. There's a lot of uncertainty, confusion about what the brand is for the Democratic Party. I am taking a quick look here and just make sure I've got everything here. Okay, making sure I didn't miss any comments. There we go. Okay, good, good. Okay, let me go back to our slide presentation. Just want to make sure I didn't miss anything here. All right, there we go. There we go. So ideology. One thing that Republicans, it's remarkable when you, over the next few minutes here, this really opened my mind to thinking about how Republicans look at the idea of ideology. Let me go back a second. Look at all these groups: the NRA, Susan B. Anthony, Pro-Life America, Christian Coalition. And the lower left, you see MAHA, Make America Healthy Again, the RFK. In the lower right, you see Donald Trump talking to a national Bitcoin festival. It's 50 years ago. The idea that all of these and more organizations would show up and have booths next to each other at a CPAC conference, the Conservative Action Committee, Political Action Committee, would have been unimaginable. How on earth did all these groups look? There's a lot of pro-life Susan B. Anthony members who don't own a gun. And there's a lot of people in the Christian Coalition that think RFK is nuts. And very few people in the Christian Coalition have a passion for Bitcoin. These, in some cases, they just flat out disagree. There are pro-choice gun owners, and there's the Maha in particular is a wild one. So how do they keep the band together with this diffused number of interest groups? So this is unimaginable. But starting in the 1960s, the new right that I mentioned earlier figured out that the GOP and the conservative movement writ large would succeed if they could adjust their core values over time to allow for what Lacombe calls a durable, ever-widening political bundling. So this is the way they look at it. First, let's take the NRA. In the NRA, they have gotten broad values down. But then as the country has changed, as the people and the stressors and the threats have changed, the issues will fall into place if you get your values down. So for the NRA, from 1890 to 1960, the primary framing was, we need you to be ready in case we have to go to war. Starting in the early 60s, the threat changed. It became much more about crime. If you think about the late 1960s and the 80s and early 90s, they said you need to be able to defend yourself. It was a domestic threat. It was no longer a foreign threat. And certainly after the fall of the Soviet Union, the rubric of foreign wars, at least for a window of time, was way out of people's minds. So it became a domestic threat. It went from a foreign threat to domestic threat. It is the criminal next door. Starting in the 80s, going into the 2010s, the threat became not foreign, not even your neighbor, but it became your government. And I think we all have seen that language, and it got pretty wild at times, especially going into the 2010s. It was the threat of government taking your liberty. And this is where, even in some of the worst mass shootings, eventually, quickly, the NRA would fall back into this is a tragedy, but if we step on people's liberties, what are we as a country? And they found it to be very effective politics. As we get to the late 2010s, what we have seen is something even more primal. They, whoever they are attacking your identity. So it's not even now that they're taking your liberty. They are taking away your ability to be who you are, that you are a bad person because you own a gun, that you are a bad person because you hunt, or because you're a white guy, or because you want to protect your home with a weapon. It became the most primal and personal, attacking your very identity. And it has changed and has remained effective. So here's how they build ideology. Step one, allow political bundling. You got to keep the choice between, in this case, the Democrats and the Republicans, broad enough to allow the widest possible coalition to feel welcome into your coalition. So, how could the Susan B. Anthony folks and the NRA and Maha and Bitcoin, how could you get all of them when they don't agree on guns or abortion or cryptocurrency or vaccines? How could they be in the same party? Well, they've created a framing that kind of allows for it. Equality versus freedom. This is the current rubric of the NRA and of the conservative movement. Identity is self-sufficiency. That is a core part of the NRA's identity. So they see gun control as a form of big government. So if you are against gun control, it is indirectly a form of self-sufficiency. So if you're anti-big government, you are pro self-sufficiency. But then you take somebody like some of the fiscal conservatives, the Heritage Foundation, who may not have a strong opinion about guns, but they have a very strong, the Cato um, think tank. You can take the fiscal conservatives who are primarily anti-big government, and you can stitch this equality versus freedom narrative to take somebody who says, well, I don't really have an opinion about big government. I'm on Medicare. I'm fine with Medicare. I'm on Medicaid. I need Medicaid. My kids go to public school. They're not waking up in the morning thinking about big government as the problem the way that, Paul Ryan or Mitt Romney would have 15 years ago. But they do think of themselves as self-sufficient and they want to be free. So being anti-gun control is self-sufficiency, but being anti-gun control is also anti-big government. By the same token, you can support the military because it's defense of liberty. So that's consistent with self-sufficiency as well. They've created a wide enough umbrella to allow people to ease very comfortably stitch their personal circumstances into the equality versus freedom metric or choice in a way that makes them very comfortable standing next to an RFK Jr. who, during his confirmation process, there was Tom Tillis, the Republican senator from North Carolina, noted this was amazing. There were several weeks where people were allowed to submit comment about RFK. He said, I didn't get one piece of communication from a conservative in North Carolina telling me they had a problem with the fact that he has a long history of being pro-choice. He's like, this is something that 10 years ago wouldn't have happened. But now it's happening because Trump wanted RFK. That was enough for most people. But beyond that, RFK is an anti-establishment figure. And a lot of these folks have seen the freedom as anti-establishment. So it allowed a way for people to accept RFK, even while they totally disagreed with them on most environmental policy, abortion rights, and so much more. And that's something that we're not seeing in the Democratic Party right now. Here's the second thing, and this is probably, I think, one of the most important things that I've learned from this book. I want you to think about the state and national Democratic Party as I describe the Republican Party right now. It's called party group alignment. Party group alignment is when major anchoring groups, so like the NRA or the Christian right, or on the left, it might be national choice related organizations or traditionally labor unions. When a major anchoring group forgoes autonomous action because they're going to ally with a major party, they're going to fold a lot of their activity into one of the two major parties. So they align their group with the party. They willingly de-emphasize their non-core issues in exchange for building an alliance with a major party based on the one thing they really care about. So in the Republican Party in 2024, the RFK example, they don't agree on, there's so many things they don't agree on, but they do agree on anti-establishment politics. RFK had a giant chip on his shoulder. He felt like he was disrespected by the Democratic Party. He felt like the establishment was sandbagging him. Trump, of course, this has been his rhetoric for many years. And when Trump said, your party is rejecting you, I accept you, I will overlook the things that we clearly disagree on. We'll overlook some of the trash talk I've done about you, Robert. In exchange, I will give you a real seat at the table, for example, HHS, and let you do your thing. Join me. And it was a powerful, unlikely alliance. In 2016, he did the same thing. The Christian right. This is somebody who's given money to pro-choice candidates for decades. This is somebody who has said he's a pro-choice candidate. I mean, on a personal level, obviously, he's been divorced. He's cheated on spouses countless times. Like all these things that we know and that run counter to what the Christian right's rhetoric has been for decades. But when Trump was worried that Ted Cruz was going to take the nomination away from him in 2016 by getting the Christian right, he made a deal. He said, I will make a list of judges that I promise I will pick from to take Supreme Court vacancies. And that's what he did. They were all approved by the Federalist Society, part of that new right infrastructure that was created starting in the 70s. They all said that they would overturn Roe if given the chance. He promised he would do that. He got 3 chances. He did it 3 times. He kept his end of the bargain. The Christian right said, that's good enough for us. And they don't really care about the rest of it. They really don't care. And I have a lot of my Democratic friends who find this somewhere between shocking and downright distasteful, because it seems like a lot of people on the right are willing to give up some values in exchange for power. And what I'm telling you is that's exactly right. As long as they get the number one thing they care about, they're willing to give up everything else. So here it is. Combining, oh, whoops, I think I'm, yeah, no, there we go. So it's not that in their, Robert Kennedy would still say he's pro-choice. He's just saying, in exchange for the chance to be the Secretary of Health and Human Services, I will just not get into that. And I will, that's still my value, but I'm willing to give up a lot in order to be part of the 10. It's an interesting contrast, depending how you look at it. When we talk about intersectionality, largely on the center left now, we don't hear that on the right. We hear that on the center left. There is, one could interpret intersectionality as the opposite of this, as the further integration, not just on your top issues, but that you must agree far down the list. And if there's disagreement on the 3rd issue or the 4th issue or the 5th issue, that could be enough to ruin the partnership and to get kicked out of the tent, so to speak. Others might see it a different way, but clearly the only intersectionalism going on the center right over the last 50 years, accelerated by Trump, the NRA doing this as well as anybody, is to say, just let me keep my number one issue and go to work. In exchange, you do whatever you want. That's very different from most of the rhetoric we're hearing. I'll put it this way. It would be difficult to imagine a Democrat who opposed abortion rights, but was, quote, good on most or all other issues, being able to survive a state Senate primary, for example, in a relatively red district, what would almost certainly happen is that another Democrat would primary them, would largely run on abortion rights as a more or less as a single issue primary, and likely win that primary, potentially going away. Whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing is secondary in this context to the reality that it does make it harder to build a wide tent with wide values. And I think that's one of the things that Democrats right now are battling. And it makes it harder to get a majority at the state or national level. So we've talked about identity, we've talked about ideology. So this brings us to the final part, ideational power, as Matthew Lacombe calls it. It is the combination of strong identity that is built by causes and groups that interact and build relationships, combining that identity with wisely constructed ideological bundles that can keep a party's brand simple and clean. So when you have ideational power, here's what you're not doing. You're not spending time and money persuading people to join you. You're your people are with you, and the folks that are not with you yet know what you stand for, and your army is able to go and do the work rather than you doing a top-down effort to try to persuade people to join you. You're not convincing them that you share common values. When you have ideational power, people are already inclined to believe you share values together. So you're not spending time going, well, no, you and I are actually a lot alike. The conversation begins presuming that you're a lot alike. You're not spending time and money lobbying politicians to vote your way because the politicians already know where you stand. They know you have the hammer to lay on them if they go the wrong way. They know that their next election's in a lot of trouble if you have enough ideational power because you just don't have people on your side. You have passion on your side. You have identity on your side. And you're not spending a lot of money on paid advertising because most of that paid advertising is to try to convince people, to lobby people, or to persuade people. It's not typically to motivate people. So you're not spending your money on this. Here's what you are spending your time and money on. You're spending your time and money engaging your base, informing your supporters, keeping them in the loop with branded, unique, owned platforms of communication. It could be digital, it could be traditional paper, mail, whatever. You are spending resources connecting your supporters in person regularly. I think we need to do a much better job of this as state and national Democrats. The power of being together is real. And the NRA, there's so much evidence of it in the book. And this is how you get people that aren't on the team yet. You get your supporters to slowly bring their friends into the tent. It's a much more powerful way to move people than to have a top-down approach where a stranger, in effect, or even an expert, is trying to convince somebody that they should be part of your organization. And then the last thing is you got to make your base feel appreciated. I mean, some of it's just saying thank you and meaning it, but a lot of it is the relationship. Part of the reason, speaking personally, I'll get asked a lot why I do so many events, why I like, driving at night and going to many of your towns and doing these events. Part of it is I love to share, to teach and learn. But a lot of it is these are my friends. In each of these communities, I look forward. Thursday night, I'm going to be in Wolfboro doing an event. And there are going to be several dozen people there that I've known for many years. I'm looking forward to the people part of it. These are friends. I appreciate them. They appreciate me. We have a friendship. We have a relationship. And it makes it easy for the new people coming in. They will feel that energy. They will become friends quickly. They will feel like they are friends quickly. We're building ideational power when we do that because we're sharing ideas, but we're sharing identity at the same time. That's ideational power. It's relationship building. My advice to these congressional candidates in the first district who are all beginning their campaigns, all of them have different strengths and weaknesses, but I urge them, start early building authentic relationships with activists, volunteers, with the town committees. Get there early, stay there late, make friends. If you love it, people will be drawn to you and your message. You're building ideational power. There's three, what he calls three faces of ideational power. This is what happens when you cultivate identity and ideology and you do it the right way. There are three ways that you build power. And I want us to have power. I want New Hampshire Democrats to have the kind of power that allows us to do all three of these things. The lowest form of power, the ability to win an open, visible political conflict. I'll show you what that is in a second. That's like, how do you win a vote in the legislature? Like a vote. The second one, the ability to influence the policy agenda. How do you create respect and fear to the point where people are making decisions based off of what they believe, anticipate you will and what you can do? And the third one is the ability to shape opinions and identities and preferences of others. This is the highest form of power. This is when you are changing how people identify which party is their home. So level one, the gray, level one ideational power. These are the kind of questions, if you can answer them affirmatively, then you may have level one ideational power. Your delegation, your county or local committee, your local elected official, whatever it is. Number one, can you get people out to show intense support or opposition to a bill? When the chips are down, can you make it happen to get people to do things, to show up? Number two, when there is an election, can you mobilize supporters to assist in the electioneering? That's the level one. Can you get them to do a little something, especially when you have a little notice? This is very valuable power, obviously, but it's very resource intensive. And it's the least assured to consistently succeed. It's very powerful, though, and most organizations don't really ever get to level one ideational power. So it is very valuable, but it does take a lot of resources. What you want, it's the light blue, level two ideational power. You're changing how legislating is being done. Can you keep a topic from even being debated? Can you get elected officials to shape their agenda based on what they fear you will do if they do the wrong vote? That is power. You can see how that's the next level, because now you're not even trying to kill a bill. They are not even going to introduce the bill. I would argue, to some extent, this is where, although we have lost rights as it relates to abortion in this state and this country, but in this state since 2018, we've seen a real degradation. We have seen a greater degradation of abortion rights in the last decade in New Hampshire than in any other decade in the history of New Hampshire, certainly modern history. That said, the one thing we've been able to do really well with it is when we run against an anti-choice Republican, hardcore anti-choice, over the LaMontagne for governor a couple times. Some of the federal candidates have been hardcore anti-choice. They have paid a very heavy price politically, to the point where Governor Ayotte, who is a pro-life person in terms of her personal beliefs, her time in the U.S. Senate, she knows that if she wants to be governor, she cannot project the quote pro-life values. If she does, she will lose an election. She knows it. And that's why the ideational power that we have on that issue in New Hampshire shapes what is even entering the legislature. Those of you who are in the legislature know the Republicans do not want abortion restriction type bills in the bloodstream of New Hampshire politics. It's the fastest way for them to lose their majorities, to lose the governorship in 2026. Not the only way, we're working on that, but it's the fastest way. That's a level two power. Frankly, on environmental policy, environmental groups in New Hampshire, center-left groups, do not currently have that kind of power. Republicans do not feel threatened, generally speaking, scared to legislate anti-environmental, anti-clean energy policy, anti-conservation, and so forth. They don't feel the level two power. I'm not sure they even feel level one on that right now. And so you can think about this in different topics, different policies. And now here's the big time power, level three. You're changing how the people think, not the legislators. You're changing New Hampshire. You're changing America. Can you shape political opinions, identities, preferences of others? Can you use the power of brand and personality, the force of election results to change how people think? And can you get people to rethink who's on my team? What team should I be a part of? This is the level 3 ideational power, very powerful. And very few can get to this point. The NRA was able to get to this power, and they have exercised it. So last slide, then I'll get off of this. We'll go to conversation. Here's what Democrats need to do to build ideational power at the highest level.
Can we ask people to mute?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think somebody may be off mute right now. What Democrats need to do to build ideational power. The first thing is we have to figure out as a state, as a national party, how do we build a form of identity politics that is inclusionary in its tone rather than exclusionary? Whether it's fair or not, the polling shows it, voting results show it. Feedback I know in my own life I get from non-Democrats hits me in the face at every birthday party and anniversary, is the Democratic brand of identity politics is seen right now as exclusionary. We are not getting a big enough percentage of the electorate to feel like this can be their home. And so that means we have no margin for error. The Republicans are exercising identity politics, quote unquote, just as much as we are, just as much. They don't call it that, but they are. But their identity politics at the moment is a majority number. It doesn't mean they win all the elections, but what we want, Democrats want to be a party where, as you see in the bottom bullet point here, our coalitions, our language, our values, that we can get 60 to 70% of the country or our state who could plausibly call the Democratic Party their home. Not because they all will, but they could. And that's how we get 55% of the vote, is by starting with 60 to 70% of the electorate who could get there. And then I skipped the second point. Building an ideology, a set of values and policies that is affirmative, that connects to what would improve individual households' lives, and is not largely defined as being anti-Trump, anti-Republican, or anti-things. Our most successful national politicians have generally been aspirational, whether it was Bill Clinton in 1992 or Barack Obama in 2008, even in Jimmy Carter in 1976, John Kennedy in 1960. The Democrats who have done the best have generally been able to create a contrast against the Republicans, but have largely been affirmative and optimistic in their tone and their policies. They are going to make your life better. That's what we are here to do, and here's how we're going to do it. That's a powerful message and tone that is necessary to build the identity and ideology that put together creates ideational power. A couple of quick reminders, and then I'll come off of this. We'll have some further discussion. So my Substack, where I go through a lot of this and many other topics, is at stevemarchand.com. It's free to do it. There's a paywall and so forth, and a paid subscription. And many of you are paid subscribers, to which I'm deeply grateful. It allows me to do the work, and I try to deliver a lot of content at a high level. And we do a lot of these kind of events, and this is one of the benefits that I try to provide for folks is generosity. I have a couple of podcasts that I'm trying to grow quickly. The one on the left is a political one. Largely, it's a lot like the Substack. I'm doing a lot of interviews. You'll see more of that in the weeks to come. That is for high engagement voters. That in New Hampshire, we have a lot of suburban high engagement voters that are voting for federal Democrats, but they're voting for state level Republicans. More than any state in America, we have this problem. And in the long run, this is meant to be one of the platforms to help communicate to these sort of high engagement, politically engaged voters who right now don't see the state Democratic Party as a good home for them. We got to change that. The one on the right is a sports one. I love sports. I do a lot of that. And that's for lower engagement voters who are not, they're not low information, they're low political information. A lot of them are big sports fans. I try to share my passion with them, with guests who are really well-versed in sports, in the media industry mainly, and in the podcast world. That's going to grow as well. And what I'm hoping over the months and the next couple of years is we have folks that come for the sports and stay for the politics. And that is, there's no Joe Rogan of the left kind of thing. People trusted Joe Rogan, and then they were interested in his political opinions, not the other way around. This is sort of the same idea. And then the political action committee I have that helps down ballot candidates is movethegoalpostnh.com. My YouTube channel has a lot of videos and the video version of the podcast. And those are both free. And I would hope that you'd look at them and share them to others that you think might like it. So that is some of that information. And I'm glad to go back to any slides if you have any specific questions. Let's see. But any questions you have or comments? I'd like feedback, all of the above.
Question, Steve. Henry Noel here. How is ideational power different from branding?
It's a form of, that's a good question. I spend a lot of time thinking about branding in the events I do. We actually do some nights we do a lot of programming where I ask the attendees who are Democratic activists, right, typically, what do you think the brand of the state party is right now? And then it leads to some discussion. Often people feel uncertain about what the brand is. So that brand is is closely aligned with identity. And it can have an ideological element to it, but its brand is a subset of ideational power. So brand is part of how you see yourself, how you see the party, but the ideational adds this relationship element to it that gets to other people that are like me, that share my values and make me feel like I'm part of a team. That is the kind of thing that, like, for an NRA member, you want to pay the $30 a year to be a member, even if you don't read the magazine, because you want the bumper sticker, because you want people to know you're on the same team. So brand is an element of it. If you have a great brand, I think it's easier to build the relationship, but it's not sufficient for ideational power. So it's this ideology plus identity, and brand is closer to identity. In New Hampshire, we seem to be struggling a little with that brand. It was interesting. I was going back and forth. I'm going to have John Kuiper on my podcast shortly, and he's running as an independent gubernatorial candidate this time. You may have seen that. He ran as a Democrat last year, got about 9% of the vote on very little money. And it's interesting to hear him talk about why he's running, because I would argue, we have to be careful as Democrats, because he does seem to be trying to build a brand that may be pretty easy to understand. It's an economic brand, it's a blue collar brand, and those are the kind of voters that we didn't get last year. A lot of them in Coos County, rural Grafton County, Sullivan County. There's a west side of Manchester. Like, there's a lot of them out there, and I want to have John on to talk about that a little bit, because I think he is attacking the branding thing in a pretty thoughtful way, and we just have to be really careful, or else he's going to be taking Democratic votes in a way that would guarantee Kelly's reelection. Oh, Leslie, you had a question. I'm sorry, in the chat. Let me read it real quick here. I think Harris was thoroughly affirmative. What factors do you see that explained her loss? Let's see. And can you speak? Okay, yeah. Can you speak about the messaging from the new right media that has been demonizing Democrats for decades? Well, and then you mentioned Steve Bannon. So one thing about Harris that people overlook, Harris did much better in the states that she spent most of her time in, the 7 swing states, than she did in the states where she did not. So what I mean by that is, she didn't spend much time in New Hampshire, for example. We were not seen as a tier 1 swing state. She spent no time in New York State, right? Or New Jersey. But she only won New Jersey by 6 points. Where you saw Trump make the greatest gains were the places where Democrats spent the least money communicating. It didn't flip any states, right? We didn't lose New Jersey because we didn't spend money in it. But we almost lost New Hampshire because it wasn't one of the 7. Trump gained about 8 points in New York State in 2024 compared to 2020. I mean, these are big numbers. He did much better in Massachusetts than he did in 2020. So there's a lot of evidence that Harris's comms were underrated because it appeared to do good work in the states where they spent the money on the communication as compared to the states where they didn't. And Trump, because he had more of a national campaign, was able to make inroads in states that he was never going to win, but that it's why he won the popular vote, right? He didn't win the popular vote because he did a couple points better in Wisconsin. He won the popular vote because he did, 7 points better in California, 8 points better in New York State, this sort of thing. So I do think that Harris gets a little bit of an unfair rap because there's evidence that her campaign did make a real difference. It just, she was in a hole that she couldn't quite climb out of. That's a lot. Do I think she was the optimal candidate we could have had? It's hard because we don't know, right? I mean, this is not having a primary. We don't know, but I think that she got a lot of the way out of a pretty deep hole. That frankly, Biden's late departure, the debate, the June debate, the inflation, like she was in a big hole. She got about three-quarters of the way out of the hole in 100 days. It's pretty good. And then Bannon, Democrats don't matter, the media matters. One of the most important things that we talk about at my events, I get asked most of the time, how come Democrats don't break through the media the way that the Republicans seem to break through the media? And I actually give the Elon Musk answer, because we are the media. The media landscape has changed so much. And this is what Bannon's getting at. It's your YouTube channel. It's your social media feed. It's your podcast. Or it's the podcast you share with your friend, right? The one you like, that you share with the people that trust you. You are the media now. All of us are the media now. Your network and who trusts you, that's the media now. There's no Walter Cronkite and there's no Dan Rather or Tom Brokaw. There just isn't. Like, we are that now, which is part of why I spend time trying to start building some media platforms. Democrats are going to have to get to where the Republicans got to a long time ago. And instead of trying to figure out how to navigate traditional media, we create our own platforms and our own networks and we go. The Republicans are doing that much better than we are. Yeah, Leslie.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that. I think you're right. And I think that the shifting of the media landscape is really relevant. Um, but I'm still baffled by the fact that Fox News, which is the most listened to quote unquote news show now, was the only outlet that has been sued to the damage of $787 million. And they have been shown to have lied to their listeners. Absolutely, definitively, there is no question. And they didn't lose media share. So it's just very disheartening to think that there's a big slice of Americans that are happy to be lied to.
It's so I'll take my folks. My folks are big time Fox News consumers, viewers, and when we get together, we talk about it sometimes. I mean, we obviously don't agree on this stuff, but we love each other and we're able to do it. And I'll be honest, I learn a lot. I'd like to think they learn a little bit too, but I definitely learn a lot. And there is a relationship that is built where each program refers to the other, the personalities. My mom really likes Jesse Waters, the 8 p.m. show, which is I don't know if it's the highest rated on Fox, but it's been the highest. That used to be the Bill O'Reilly, Tucker Carlson time slot that now Jesse Waters has, and they do a better job than certainly CNN, MSNBC, or anybody else at making the people at home feel like they have a relationship with the viewers. You're in on the joke. You're in on the code language. You're in on the inside stuff. And sometimes I'll watch Fox News because I'll look at it as if I was my folks and say, my folks are smart and we disagree and I'm smart, like what's up? And I try to watch it through their eyes. And it helps me get it a little bit. Like it's entertaining, it's engaging, and you are part of something in a way that I don't think CNN, which has the worst, I mean, the ratings are awful at CNN. There's no sense that you're on a team, right? Like you're part of a family. With Fox, you're kind of part of a family. I know that's not a specific or quantified answer, but the ratings show that they have a loyalty, you know, that dwarfs MSNBC and Fox. I'm sorry, and CNN. But Joe Rogan gets millions of views every episode. He has that relationship. And that's, we don't need to have our own TV show to build that relationship. We need to take whatever our universe of trusted people are and make that our network. Because they're the most powerful way to get somebody on your team is if they have a relationship with you that is not primarily political. And then over time, politics comes in, and eventually you become a third-party validator for them. So we're playing the long game, and we all have a role to play, whether we have 10 people or, we're Jesse Waters and we have a couple million people a night. He's doing the same thing. I see. Okay, here we go. Jerry says, I don't see how the opportunity for younger grand estaters is enhanced from the removal of the interest and dividends tax. Yeah, how does this and then the vouchers, how does this possible message fit in the ideation model? It's a good question. Right now, going back to at least the Mel Thompson days of the 1970s, the Republican Party in New Hampshire has owned the message of we're the party against taxes, and the Democrats are the ones that love to raise your taxes. And they have over 50 years found a way to somehow not include property taxes as a tax, even though for most New Hampshireites, it's the number one non-federal tax you will pay this year. If you're a small business, if you're a sole proprietor in New Hampshire, the biggest non-federal tax you will pay will probably be the property taxes on your home. And what we need to do as Democrats, and Jerry, this is a whole nother night, and it's something I'm working on increasingly for events. In New Hampshire, there are 3 issues that 2/3 of the people say is the number one issue: property taxes, the quality of local schools, and the big one right now is housing. And I would contend strongly that that's actually the same issue described 3 different ways. It's a triangle. They all affect the other 2. And the party that can first connect that as the ideological underpinning of being a Democrat or Republican in New Hampshire, that's going to be the one that's winning the ideological battle. Right now, the Republicans, those of you in the legislature know this, right now the Republicans know they're up a creek. Some of them say we need state laws to supersede local law in order to make housing easier to build. They're having that debate within their caucus right now. Some of them are saying we have to reduce spending at the local level. How are we going to do it? Oh, I know. We're going to cap how much your district can spend per pupil on education. The Free Staters, some of them want to put a cap on how much your school board can spend on schools. This is remarkable. It didn't get anywhere, but they get that the relationship between housing, schools, and property taxes is one and the same. And both parties have to kind of sprint to solve that problem. And the one that does it better and controls the language, I think they're gonna have the power over the next 5, 10, 15 years. That's gonna be the number one issue. And I spend time thinking about how we can be the party that owns that. If we own that, that's a big part of the ideological part of ideation. Then we get to identity. And I think this is about connecting at the local level. If you care about schools, if you care about property taxes, if you care about housing, if you'd like your kids to be able to still live in New Hampshire, if these are values that we can get into that connect with ideology. I think this is where the sweet spot is for New Hampshire Democrats. I'm not sure we're there right now. I would like our gubernatorial candidate in 2026 to hammer this point, because I think Kelly is not going to be strong on it. And I think there's a weakness there that we can exploit politically, and it's the right thing to do policy-wise. Oh, and then Pat Long with a good question. Doesn't NPR cultivate that dynamic though? Why is Fox better at it? NPR does. I think NPR does cultivate that. Well, here's the problem. One problem: NPR's target audience has a smaller potential, a lower ceiling than Fox's. There are many more people who could be a Fox person. Demographically, there are many more people like my folks, just as a percentage of the country, than there are people who would fit the stereotype of an NPR listener, at least as we know it, right? There's a higher income, higher educational attainment brand. I think Patrick, you'd probably agree. For a typical NPR listener, that's a much smaller audience. Only about a little over 1 out of 3 Americans has a college degree. So NPR is going after that audience. There's just not as many of them to start with. I think that's part of the issue. I do think NPR has cultivated that brand, though, including some of their on-air personalities. Unfortunately, some of them they've let go of with some of their funding problems. So I think the main problem for NPR is they're just playing with a much smaller potential universe. That's the first problem. Oh, sure, yeah. So why are Fox listeners okay with being lied to? Um, I'll tell you a quick story, and I will finish up by 8, but this is not a bad way to wind it down. I asked my dad a version of this question about a year ago. You know, Trump lies about stuff. You know, the tax cuts for the corporations and the wealthy aren't going to help people like my folks who are retired, working class, own their home in Pinardville, in Goffstown, French Canadian immigrants. Neither completed high school. They both worked their butts off, got into the middle class. Awesome, awesome people, awesome work ethic. Trump isn't for you. Your priorities and his are not the same. Why are you voting, I said, against some of your self-interest? And my dad said something powerful. He said, you are assuming that my most important self-interest is economic. And it is important, but there's something more important. It's my identity. And Steve, your party over the years has made somebody like me feel like I'm not welcome, like I'm a lesser person because he swung a hammer for a living and he built the very homes that we desperately need. Well, my dad was the guy building those homes. He was a self-employed carpenter, good at it. He didn't have a college degree. And, it's like the old thing, like, do you have a job where you take a shower before you go to work, or do you have a job where you take a shower when you get home from work? And my dad, had to take a shower when he got home from work because he's working his butt off. That our party has lost a lot of people like that, and Fox communicates, you're okay. It's okay to be you. You're not a bad person because you're you. And then we can get into the weeds and the policies, and that matters. But man, if you start there, and it's so what I want us as a party to do is we need to get back to a place where that tent is big enough, where somebody could disagree with me on a given issue, and they're not, or a demographic or whatever, and they're not excluded. I want them to feel included. And that's going to be a necessary part of us getting back to majority status at the state level, national level. And we do have a lot of work to do on it. It's identity. It is ideology. At the end, it's this ideational power. So I don't know if they feel like they're being lied to or not. I think in their own way, I think a lot of the viewers feel like they are being at least respected on the most basic level of all, who they are as a human being. It's okay to be them. Tough to beat that. So anyway, it is about 8 o'clock, and I probably need to close it down. What I will do is I will. There were a ton of folks. It's another night. It's another protest. So a lot of folks are like, "Are you going to be recording this?" The answer was obviously yes. Terry, I saw that. Yes. I'm going to download that. What I'm going to do is by tomorrow morning, it'll be on my YouTube page, but it'll be linked, a private link. So basically, everybody here tonight will get it. And then other folks who are paid subscribers or registered for the event that I'll be rescheduling, I promise we'll have a date soon. I'm trying to confirm a guest, one or more guest speakers. So it's their availability that'll help drive that. And that's been a little tricky. But I want to have a period of time where that you folks will exclusively have that link. Obviously, if you want to share it, I'm not going to stop you from doing that. And eventually it'll be a public video. But for now, it will be private. And you guys will get that, and I'll send an email out with that link, and then you can share it, watch it, and folks that weren't here tonight will obviously be able to do that too. So, and any feedback, if you are in your area, your district, and you would like to do some programming, I've done about 40 in-person programs this year. We have a great time. We do different things depending on what your local committee wants to talk about. It's obviously free of charge. I enjoy it. We schedule it. We go for it. So some of you I see haven't really been in Nashua too much this year. I really like to get to Coos County and other places. So if you want to do something like that, get a hold of me anytime and we'll set it up. We'll have a good time. All right. I see Ann waving, which unless she has her hand up, I'll take that as her saying goodbye. There we go.
I'm clapping. That's an
Oh,
applause.
that's a clapping. Okay. Well, those are all really nice. I really appreciate that. Okay, guys. Thanks so much. I hope you enjoyed it. You'll get the link by tomorrow, and let me know if you need anything. Here to help.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.